To escape Victoria Sterling, the Ice Queen CEO with a god complex, I faked my own death in a fire. For 2 years, I lived under a new identity, making $3 grand a month as a security guard in some forgotten Ohio town. Life was simple and I was free until the day the corporation's new CEO flew in for an inspection. I got shoved forward to open the gate. Our eyes met, and for the first time, Victoria Sterling's glacial face showed an emotion. That night, her security team dragged me out of my rented room. She used my own tie to bind my hands behind my back, pushing me up against the floor-to-ceiling window of her office. "My dear departed husband," she whispered, her breath ghosting over my skin. "Do you see the empire I built for you down there?" Her voice was a silken thread. "Tell me, how should I reward you for this miraculous resurrection? Should I push you from here and throw you the grandest funeral this city has ever seen? Or—" She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear. "Should I lock you up for the rest of your life, where you can never run again?" She said I had to make up for lost time. When my body was about to give out, she'd bring me some concoction in a bowl. "Be good," she'd murmur. "It's a special blend. Very potent. Drink up. We have a long night ahead." "Ethan, stop spacing out. The big boss is here. Go open the damn gate." My co-worker's shove nearly knocked the cigarette from my lips. I sighed, straightened the ill-fitting security uniform, and ambled toward the main gate. I'd learned one thing in 2 years as a guard: how to milk the clock. What was the big deal about some new boss, anyway? A procession of black sedans rolled up, oozing money and power. I hit the button for the gate and leaned against the guard shack, watching with bored attachment. The lead car stopped. The rear window slid down, and a face I thought I'd never see again slammed into my vision. Victoria Sterling, my widow. Time stopped. She was still the same Ice Queen, just paler than I remembered, her eyes colder. But as her gaze focused on my face, the glacier didn't just crack, it shattered. Shock, ecstasy, followed by a tidal wave of incandescent rage. My brain went blank, the blood freezing in my veins. One thought, and one thought only, run. I spun on my heel and bolted. "Get him!" Her voice, cold and trembling, chased after me. I didn't make it 2 steps before a pair of suits tackled me, slamming me face first onto the asphalt. The rough ground scraped my cheek raw. I struggled, but it was useless. All I could do was watch as a pair of impossibly expensive custom heels stopped inches from my face. That night, they blindfolded me and threw me in a car. The familiar, cold scent of her perfume, something custom, with notes of winter and control, filled my nostrils. My heart sank to the floor. The drive was long, so long I felt like a lifetime passed. When the blindfold was ripped away, the blinding light of the chandelier made me flinch. I was in her old home, the penthouse apartment I'd escaped by staging a goddamn fire. 2 years and nothing had changed. Victoria stood with her back to me, silhouetted against the massive window. She looked fragile, thin as a piece of paper. "Why did you run?" Her voice was quiet, but it held the suppressed violence of a collapsing star. I said nothing, just watched her, my body coiled like a spring. She turned slowly, closing the distance between us. "Ethan, I looked for you for 2 years. I thought you were dead. I held the biggest funeral the city has ever seen. Everyone who was anyone came to mourn you. I built this tower for you, named it after you." She reached out, her freezing fingertips tracing the line of my throat. "And what were you doing? Hiding in some dead-end town. A security guard. Smoking cheap cigarettes. Happy. Did you really think you'd gotten rid of the crazy bitch for good?" Her fingers tightened abruptly. My breath hitched. Just when I thought she would choke the life out of me, she shoved me violently against the window. The glass was ice cold against my back, the city lights a dizzying spectacle 1,000 feet below. She ripped the tie from my uniform and, with practiced ease, bound my hands behind me. Then her mouth was on mine in a brutal, punishing kiss that tasted of blood and desperation. She whispered against my ear, her voice a ragged, cruel tremor. "Game over, Ethan. Welcome home." I was a prisoner, completely and utterly. Our former home was now my gilded cage. Every window had been replaced with top-of-the-line bulletproof glass, sealed shut. Guards were posted at the door 24/7. There was no way out. Victoria had lost her mind. By day, She was the same decisive, robotic CEO, but at night, she became a demon of insatiable need. She used her body to punish my betrayal, to claw back the 2 years she'd spent in her self-imposed widowhood. After a few days, my body broke down. A fever raged, and every muscle ached as if I'd been disassembled and put back together wrong. I lay in bed, too weak to even lift a finger. That's when Victoria brought in a team of top nutritionists. Every day, a dark, bitter broth of some custom blend I couldn't name was brought to my bedside. It smelled strange, earthy, and medicinal. I turned my head away. I'm not drinking it. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, holding the bowl herself, stirring it with a spoon. Be good. Drink it. Her voice was soft, a gentle tone that made my skin crawl. I said I'm not drinking it. I yelled with what little strength I had. She didn't get angry. She just set the bowl down and deliberately gripped my jaw. The pressure was immense. I felt the bone creak. She forced my mouth open and poured the entire bowl of liquid down my throat. I choked and sputtered, the broth dribbling from the corners of my mouth in a humiliating stream. She used her thumb to wipe it away, a sick look of satisfaction in her eyes. My Ethan can't afford to be weak, she murmured. We have a lifetime ahead of us. I closed my eyes as a tear of pure humiliation slid into my hairline. In that pit of despair, I remembered why I'd signed the 5-year contract in the first place. My father, framed by my supposed best friend, Caleb Vance, had been saddled with millions in debt. The family business was collapsing. Loan sharks were our door. I was out of options when Victoria found me. She'd pay off everything, she said, if I agreed to be her husband for 5 years. I had no choice. I thought I'd be free after 5 years. I was so naive. Victoria's love was a cage, and I couldn't stand it for a single day. No, I couldn't give up. I started to feign obedience. I drank the broth on schedule. I complied with her every demand. All the while, I was secretly studying every corner of the apartment, searching for a way out. Finally, I found a potential weakness. The service elevator in the kitchen, a small dumbwaiter used for grocery deliveries that went straight down to the building's service level. Hope surged in my chest. I waited for my chance. One night, as she was feeding me the broth, I accidentally knocked the bowl from her hands. The hot liquid splashed all over her. I'm so sorry. I apologized frantically, grabbing napkins to help her clean up. In that moment of distraction, I shoved her aside and bolted for the kitchen. Freedom was right there. I threw all my weight into pulling open the dumbwaiter door. Standing on the other side was Victoria. In her hand was a piece of paper, the escape route map I'd hidden under my mattress. She smiled at me, a smile colder than a Siberian winter. Going somewhere? She asked sweetly. I'll come with you. She didn't hit me. She didn't even yell. She just retrieved a velvet box from her jewelry case and opened it. Inside was a platinum anklet, delicate and beautiful, studded with tiny diamonds. She knelt and fastened it around my ankle. It clicked shut. The other end of the chain was attached to the cold, steel bed frame. She looked up, pressing a reverent kiss to my ankle. There, she said. Now I won't have to worry about you getting lost again. My world went dark. After the anklet, Victoria somehow became even more gentle. She would pull a chair up to the bed and read me the Wall Street Journal, detailing the company's latest acquisitions as if we were a normal, loving couple and I was merely convalescing. She even had someone go to my hometown and buy the chicken noodle soup from the little diner I'd loved as a kid. She'd blow on each spoonful, feeding it to me with a clumsy tenderness that mimicked my mother. Is it good? She'd ask, her eyes wide with hope. I'd chew mechanically, tasting nothing. This woman was completely insane. Her gentleness was poison-coated in sugar, and it made me sick to my stomach. But I stopped fighting. I became a puppet, numbly accepting everything. Until one night, during a thunderstorm, a massive clap of thunder shook the entire penthouse. I saw Victoria's body jolt, her face instantly turning ashen. She curled into a ball, hugging herself, trembling all over. I realized then that this fearless corporate queen was terrified of thunderstorms. This was her weakness, my only chance. Another bolt of lightning lit up the sky, and she let out a small, strangled cry, instinctively scrambling into my arms like a frightened kitten. Her body was cold and rigid, shaking violently against mine. On impulse, a strange instinct taking over, I wrapped my arms around her. I mimicked the way she soothed me, stroking her back gently. "It's okay," I whispered, the words tasting like lies even to me. "I'm here." Gradually, she relaxed in my arms. That night, she fell asleep leaning against my chest, staring at her unguarded face. A complex, predatory thrill coursed through me. I used this newfound vulnerability to plan my second escape. I played the part of the comforter, whispering reassurances, lulling her into a false sense of security. A few days later, I staged a complete emotional collapse. I buried myself under the covers, refusing to eat or drink, muttering my parents' and sisters' names over and over. Just as I'd hoped, Victoria panicked. She tried to coax me out, her voice laced with a frantic edge, asking me what I wanted. Peeking through a gap in the comforter, I saw the desperation on her face and sneered internally. "I miss my parents," I rasped. "I want to see them." She was silent for a long time. I knew she was weighing the risks. Finally, she conceded. "Fine, I'll arrange a video call." I was ecstatic, but on the outside, I remained a broken man. The plan was simple. During the call, I'd mouth the words "help me" to my sister. She was smart. She would understand. The call connected quickly. My parents and my sister's familiar faces appeared on the screen. They looked, well, better, even than before I died. "Ethan, you stupid kid, where have you been?" my mom cried, tears already streaming down her face. "Bro, are you okay? Victoria said you were in an accident and lost your memory." "We were so worried," my sister sobbed. I opened my mouth to form the silent plea for help. Just then, the camera view widened, and Victoria stepped into the frame, smiling. She linked her arm through mine, her touch a proprietary brand. "Mom, Dad," she said cheerfully to the screen, "Ethan's just been working too hard. I keep telling him to rest, but you know how he is. Look how thin he's gotten." I froze, every muscle in my body rigid. On the screen behind my family, I could see the living room of Victoria's sprawling Connecticut estate. In the background was the antique vase I'd helped her win at an auction years ago. After she ended the call, the smile vanished from her face. She looked down at me, her voice like ice chips. "Were you about to say you missed them again? Because I can have them brought here tomorrow. We can all be reunited. Right here, in this apartment." A bucket of ice water crashed over me, chilling me to the bone. She had my only weakness clutched tightly in her hand. I was utterly, completely defeated. I gave up. All of it. I became a stagnant pool of water, letting her arrange my life as she saw fit. She seemed pleased with my compliance and loosened her grip slightly. At least the nightly torment ceased. Days bled into weeks, and my spirit died a little more with each one, until I started noticing something was off with Victoria. She was tired all the time, sometimes dozing off in the middle of a video conference. And she had a new, violent aversion to certain smells. One day, the housekeeper made fish, and the scent alone sent her running to the bathroom to retch. She blamed it on stress and overwork. But an impossible thought began to form in my mind. One day, I had the housekeeper bring me a plate of dill pickles. As Victoria watched, I slowly took one and bit into it, letting my face pucker at the sourness. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. I saw her swallow hard, a flicker of unmistakable craving on her face. My heart hammered against my ribs. That night, I asked her nonchalantly, "You're late this month, aren't you?" She was reviewing a report and waved a dismissive hand. "It's been a while. I'm just busy. My cycle's always been irregular." A storm erupted inside me. Fear, absurdity, but above all, the exhilarating rush of grabbing a lifeline. I put down the pickle and sat beside her, my expression more serious than it had been in years. "Victoria, you need to go to doctor." She shot me a cold look, assuming it was another trick. "What are you planning now?" "Nothing. I just don't want you to drop dead for some unknown reason." For the first time, I stood my ground. I used a hunger strike as a weapon. If something happens to you, or to what's inside you, then there's no point in you keeping me alive, is there? My resolve stunned her. She stared at me for a long time, her expression a complex mixture I couldn't decipher. Finally, she called her private physician. The test results came back quickly. She was pregnant. 6 weeks. She held the thin ultrasound printout, her perpetually frozen face showing a blank expression and vulnerability I had never seen before. She looked like a lost child. I looked at her, and for the first time in 2 years, I smiled. A genuine, triumphant smile. I shook my leg, making the delicate platinum chain jingle. So I said, my voice smooth, "Shall we discuss terms, Ms. Sterling?" I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped the paper, her body trembling slightly. For the first time in this sick game, I held the trump card. I was no longer the prisoner. I was the one holding the leverage. From that moment on, the power shifted. My first condition was removing the anklet. Victoria held the key, hesitating for a long time. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, her hand shaking. I knew that lock wasn't just on my ankle. It was on her own fragile sense of security. Unlocking it was like cutting off a limb. I didn't rush her. I just watched, my gaze steady. Finally, she took a deep breath and knelt. The key slid into the lock and turned with a soft click. The chain that had bound me for months fell to the floor. A faint red mark circled my ankle. I had won the freedom to move within the apartment. The guards were still at the door, but it was a monumental victory. Victoria changed. She started devouring parenting books and even enrolled in an online course for managing prenatal emotions. She delegated most of her work to her COO, spending her days at home. She started trying to cook for me. But the woman who commanded boardrooms was a complete disaster in the kitchen. Everything she made was either burnt or so salty it was inedible. She'd take one bite, grimace, throw it all out, and quietly order from a 5-star restaurant. She started trying to talk to me. Her conversational topics were limited to 3 things. Did it kick today? Do you think it'll look like you or me? What should we name the baby? Her awkwardness was almost comical. I started to test my new power. I told her I was craving a specific pastry from an old bakery downtown, a place famous for its long lines and limited supply. I assumed she'd send a bodyguard. Instead, she went herself. She returned that afternoon, her hair slightly messy, a sheen of sweat on her forehead. She presented the beautifully packaged pastry to me like a child offering a prize. "Here," she said, her voice breathless. "It's still warm." I looked at the hope and the plea for approval in her eyes, and for the first time, something inside me stirred. I started using prenatal education as an excuse to reconnect with the outside world. I demanded to watch TV, to use the internet, to see new movies. To my surprise, Victoria agreed to everything. I'd still make sarcastic remarks, but I found myself unconsciously reminding her to take her prenatal vitamins. When she was hit with waves of morning sickness, I'd silently hand her a glass of water. A strange, delicate balance formed between us. It was like we were clumsily role-playing a normal married couple. As I reveled in this fragile freedom, a part of me I thought was long dead began to quietly stir back to life. It was time for Victoria's first official ultrasound. Unwilling to leave me home alone, she decided to take me with her. It was the first time I had set foot outside the apartment since being brought back. The sunlight was harsh, and I had to squint. We went to a private clinic to avoid attention. Victoria made me wear a hat and a mask and wrapped herself up just as thoroughly. Even so, her height and icy elegance drew stares. I trailed behind her like a shadow. In the waiting area, I saw someone I never expected to see. My childhood friend, Mark. He was sitting across from us with his pregnant wife. My heart leaped into my throat. I pulled my hat down, trying to disappear. Too late. Mark saw me. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, then blinked again. We confirmed it was really me. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He shot up from his chair with a yell. Ethan? Are you a ghost?" His wife jumped, and everyone in the waiting room turned to stare. The scene descended into chaos. Mark, ignoring his wife's frantic tugging, rushed toward me. "Dude, don't worry. I'll find an exorcist." I was so mortified I could have died all over again. Just then, Victoria calmly stepped in front of me. She removed her sunglasses and addressed the dumbfounded Mark. "He's not dead," she stated, her voice even. "He was kidnapped years ago. He suffered a head injury and lost his memory. I only just found him." She spun a wild, dramatic tale on the spot. In her story, I was the tragic hero who had endured years of hardship, finally rescued by his devoted, searching wife. Mark gaped at her, his mouth hanging open. His eyes darted between the two of us, finally landing on Victoria's slightly rounded stomach. The terror on his face melted into a look of bro-ly admiration and dawning comprehension. He slapped his thigh. Oh, I get it. I always said the good die young, but scoundrels live forever. Wait, no, I always said you were one tough son of a bitch, Ethan. On the way home, I couldn't help but mock her. Impressive, Victoria. You've got a real talent for fiction. Ever considered screenwriting? She ignored my sarcasm and looked at me seriously. I will make that story a reality. After that incident, the news of my return from the dead with amnesia spread quickly through our old social circle. I was no longer a prisoner in the shadows, but Victoria Sterling's legitimate husband. That night, watching her struggle with her swollen feet, a common misery of pregnancy, I found myself pouring her a glass of warm water. She took it, stunned, her eyes glistening. I realized this crazy, obsessive woman was, in her own twisted way, paving a path for me and for our child. And in that moment, my heart, against all odds, softened. One evening, I stepped out of the shower to find Victoria waiting for me on the sofa, her expression grave. I braced myself for another baby-related monologue and started drying my hair, annoyed. But she stood up, walked over to me, and took a deep breath. Then she bowed a full 90 degrees. Ethan, I'm sorry. I froze. The towel fell from my hands. I never thought I would hear those words from this woman, whose pride was forged in steel. For imprisoning you, for my obsession, for not trusting you, I am truly sorry. She looked up, her eyes filled with a sincerity and remorse I had never seen before. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't know what to say. A few days later, she proposed we visit her family at their estate, to formally introduce me as her long-lost husband. I was hesitant, but the careful, hopeful look in her eyes made me agree. The Sterlings were true old money. Victoria's grandfather was a retired 4-star general who radiated an unshakable authority. Around the dinner table, the family elders scrutinized me, their disbelief in the amnesia story palpable. But Victoria protected me, deflecting every pointed question. After dinner, her grandfather challenged me to a game of chess. I knew it was a test. Across the checkered battlefield, I played carefully, strategically, and managed to win by a narrow margin. The old general studied the board for a long time before clapping me on the shoulder. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, son." I had earned his initial approval. Later, using the excuse of the restroom, I wandered through the old house. In the study, I found a childhood photo of Victoria. She was in a little princess dress, her hair in pigtails, but her face was completely devoid of joy, as cold and serious as a tiny adult. The old family housekeeper saw me looking inside. "That child has had a hard life," she said quietly. Her parents died in an accident when she was very young. The general raised her to be his successor, strict and demanding. She never had a childhood, never had a friend to confide in. She's always been so alone. I looked at the lonely little girl in the photograph, and something sharp pierced my heart. I finally understood. I understood the source of her paranoid, possessive nature. She wasn't born wanting to lock people away. She was just terrified of being left alone again. Before we left, the general spoke to me alone in his study. His sharp eyes seemed to see right through me. "Whatever happened between you two, the child is innocent, and Victoria is your wife," he said gruffly. "A man has to take responsibility." The car ride back was quiet. As the city lights streamed past the window, I reached out and took Victoria's hand. Her hand was cold. Her whole body went rigid at my touch. Then she squeezed back, her grip fierce and desperate, our fingers intertwining. In that moment, the last of my resentment began to melt away, replaced by a strange, aching pity. After the visit, our relationship thawed considerably. I started trying to understand her, to accept her. One quiet afternoon, I told her the truth about my family's bankruptcy, about how Caleb Vance, my best friend, had set my father up. Victoria listened without a word, her face unreadable. When I finished, she said only, "I see." The next day, I heard that Sterling Corp's entire legal department and a top-tier corporate intelligence firm were working around the clock. Their sole target, Caleb Vance. Caleb sensed the danger. He somehow got my private number and called me, sobbing, reminiscing about our college days, begging me to call it off. The irony was sickening. When you were destroying my father, Caleb, Did you remember our friendship then? I asked and hung up. A few days later, Caleb got desperate. He tried to kidnap the pregnant Victoria to use her as leverage against me. But he underestimated her, and he underestimated me. I had anticipated his move and worked with Victoria's security team to set a trap. The location was the same abandoned factory where I had staged my death. When Caleb and his hired thugs burst in, they were met by dozens of highly trained security professionals. He was subdued in seconds. Victoria was terrifyingly efficient. She compiled an airtight case detailing all of Caleb's financial crimes over the years and handed it directly to the authorities. He was sentenced to life in prison. My family's name was finally cleared. When the dust settled, Victoria placed a folder in front of me. Inside were the deeds to my family's original company. She had bought it all back. The new CEO was listed as Ethan Hayes. "It's yours," she said simply. I was just returning what was stolen. Looking at everything she had done for me, the last wall around my heart crumbled. I came up behind her and gently wrapped my arms around her. She tensed again, a familiar reaction. I rested my chin on her shoulder, breathing in the clean scent of her hair. "Thank you, Victoria." She relaxed into my embrace, leaning back against me. "Don't thank me," she whispered. "We're husband and wife." Yes, husband and wife. The title I had once despised now brought me a sense of peace I'd never known. Victoria's due date arrived. I stayed with her in the hospital's best VIP suite. The moment they wheeled her into the delivery room, my heart was in my throat. I paced the hallway outside, a nervous wreck, feeling the crushing weight and terrifying joy of becoming a father. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened. A nurse emerged, beaming. "Congratulations, a healthy baby girl." My hands trembled as I took the tiny, swaddle bundle. My daughter. An overwhelming, primal connection washed over me, melting my very bones. I carried her into the recovery room. Victoria lay on the bed, pale and exhausted, but her face glowed with a softness and contentment I'd never seen. She looked at me and our daughter, and she smiled. A real smile, like the sun breaking through on a winter's day, dissolving all her ice and paranoia. After the hospital, Victoria became obsessed with the baby. The boardroom titan clumsily learned to change diapers and warm bottles. All her focus was now on this tiny human. Watching her cradle our daughter, humming a tuneless lullaby, I could no longer connect this woman with the deranged monster who had chained me to a bed. I realized I didn't want to run anymore. This was where I belonged. I started planning a proposal, in secret. The location, our old college campus. One afternoon, I suggested we take a walk. I led her to the lake where we had first met. In a warm glow of the setting sun, I took our daughter from her arms and placed the baby's tiny, chubby hand in hers. Then I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring I'd been carrying for weeks. "Victoria Sterling," I said, looking into her shocked eyes. "The first 5 years were a contract. Now, I want to spend the rest of my life fulfilling my duties as your husband. Marry me. This time, for real. This time, for love." Tears instantly welled in her eyes. She looked from me to our daughter, laughing and crying at the same time, and nodded fiercely. "Yes, I will." I slipped the ring on her finger, stood, and pulled them both into my arms. 2 years later, we had another wedding. A real one this time, 100 times grander than the first sterile ceremony. It was held on the top floor of the tower she had built for me. Our daughter, Hope, was the flower girl, toddling down the aisle in a white dress, looking like a tiny angel. I stood at the altar and watched as Victoria, radiant in a white gown, walked toward me on her grandfather's arm. The paranoia and obsession in her eyes were gone, replaced by a pure, overwhelming love. As we exchanged rings, I held her hand and met her gaze. "Victoria, I used to be the one who was always trying to escape. From now on, it's my turn to lock you by my side." The guests laughed warmly. Tears streamed down Victoria's face. She smiled and whispered, "Okay, I'll let you lock me up for a lifetime." Married life was peaceful, with a familiar undercurrent of intensity. Victoria handed most of the company over to me, preferring to stay home with our daughter. She learned to cook my favorite meals and would greet me with a warm hug when I got home from work. We took Hope to the zoo and to Disneyland like any normal family. But her possessive nature never completely disappeared. She still secretly tracked my phone. If I was late coming home from work, I'd find her waiting up for me, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. Once, a new female intern at the company was a little too friendly, insisting on sitting next to me at lunch. The next day, that intern was transferred to the company's remote African branch for being exceptionally promising. I pretended not to notice. That night, I came up behind Victoria in the kitchen and wrapped my arms around her waist. Jealous. Her body stiffened. No, she said unconvincingly. I laughed softly, kissing her ear. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I just want to be locked up by you. She turned in my arms, her hands circling my neck, her eyes alight with that familiar, possessive fire, now softened by deep and abiding love. I knew her obsession would never be fully cured, but it was no longer my prison. It was a sweet trap I was more than willing to fall into. A few years later, we had our second child, a boy. I had fully taken over as CEO of Sterling Corp. Sometimes Victoria would come to the office during a board meeting, heavily pregnant, to bring me soup. My employees were used to it by now, smiling knowingly. My faked death had become something of a legend in the business world. Victoria's grandfather often said that choosing me as his granddaughter's husband was the best decision he ever made. Sometimes, I'd stand by that same floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering city, and remember that first night back, tied up and terrified. Victoria would come and wrap her arms around me from behind, resting her cheek against my back. What are you thinking about? She'd murmur. Planning another escape? I'd turn and kiss her, pulling her close, feeling the flutter of our unborn child against my hand and the steady beat of my wife's heart against my chest. I'm thinking, I'd say, that I'm glad I died. It was the only way I could ever truly start to live. I once thought freedom was everything. Now I know my entire world is right here. This cage she built for me, I'll gladly stay for a lifetime. End.